Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and this is Bliss Studio Hobbies. So for this video, we are going to do another diamond painting meets true crime video. So today we are going to talk about Peter Fabiano in a trick-or-treat murder case. And we are going to get a little bit of diamond painting done. All right, guys, so this is a true crime story. So we have to give a disclaimer, right? This video will go over true crime scenes, gory details, and language that may not be appropriate for children. So viewer discretion is advised, and if true crime is not your thing, I will see you in some other video. Thank you guys so much for watching up until this point, if you're not going to stick around, and I will see you guys next time. So again, I am working on Autumn Leaves by Marilyn Casanave. It is a Diamond Art Club one. It's 13 by 13 inch or 32.8 by 32.8 centimeter round diamond painting. It has 32 colors and 2 ABs. I am on the same spot I was on last true crime video. So surprise, surprise, right? I am working with 2 little minders from my Etsy shop, Bliss Studio Shop. By the way, I have released my Advent calendar for the year. So make sure you check out my Etsy shop, check out my Advent calendar. I am so happy to be able to offer it for this season. I love Advent calendars and everything about opening up a surprise every day. So make sure you check that out. Just a little shameless plug in there. So, and then I'm working with this Amazon pen, which I like the shape of this pen, and an older style Bella Art de Nicole tray. So without further ado, let's get started. I don't even have the story pulled up on my computer. I put my canvas on the desk here and I just turned on my camera and started talking. So let me find the story that I typed up and we will get started. All right, so I'm going to pull this cover back and use my minder to hold the cover. So this is a Halloween true crime story. I was supposed to post this story on Halloween, but I did not. I actually took that whole week of Halloween off from YouTube. I wasn't trying to, but as the week approached, I'm like, I did not record any videos and I don't have time to record any videos. This second job is killing me and I don't know how long I'm going to be doing it. That's just a little side note. So this is a Halloween true crime story, but we're still going to tell it here today. Let me get my first color here and then we will get started. It's kind of weird for me to just pull the cover back and diamond paint because I really like to diamond paint in sections because that makes more sense to my brain, but we are going to make it work. I'm going to start with this color here and then we are going to get into the story. This story was very interesting. It's not that long, but it was interesting. So let's get started. So it's 1957, Halloween night in Los Angeles, California. After a fun and exciting night of handing out candy to trick-or-treaters, Peter Fabiano and his wife Betty begin to wind down and prepare for bed. After they have completed their night routine and just settling comfortably into bed, they hear the doorbell ring. It's an odd time for a ring of the doorbell because it's 11 o'clock p.m. and all the trick-or-treaters have long gone and should be home in bed themselves. I'm going to have to replace my wax soon here. What am I using? Oh, just regular pink wax. That's why. Regular old pink wax. Despite the time, Peter reluctantly grabbed the bowl of remaining candy and answered the door. A second later, Betty heard Peter ask the person, "Isn't it a little late for this?" Betty hears the person say, "No," in a rather strange, deep voice, followed by a loud pop. The voice was deep, but it sounded like a woman pretending to be a man. 36-year-old Betty rushed to the door to see what was going on. just in time to find her 35-year-old husband laying in a pool of his own blood, barely clinging to life. The person who had done this was long gone. The Fabianos had a neighbor who was a police officer, so Betty sent their daughter over to the neighbor's house for help, and he called the Valley Police Department. Peter was then taken to the Sun Valley Hospital, where they did everything they could to save his life, but with a bullet lodged into his chest, resuscitation attempts were unsuccessful, and he was pronounced dead from a single gunshot wound to the chest. He was just 35 years old at the time of his death. So it's supposed to be a fun Halloween. You just, you're winding down for the night. All the trick-or-treaters are gone, and you hear a ring at the doorbell, and this happens. So let's dive a little bit deeper and see what's going on here. Okay, I'll do this section too. Peter Fabiano served in World War II, and he was a hairdresser who owned and operated 2 successful beauty salons in the San Fernando Valley. Guys, imagine having a husband as a hairdresser. You could essentially get your hair done anytime you want it, right? Well, I guess he was busy, so maybe if he's not too busy, you can get your hair done. But wouldn't that be awesome if your husband knew how to, do your hair? Peter met Betty in the 1940s, and they married in New York in 1955. In 1956, after getting married, they moved to California into their Sun Valley home just north of Los Angeles and Hollywood. Their house was a comfortable 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1-story house that sat on the corner of a quiet neighborhood. Peter lived with his wife Betty and her 2 children from a previous marriage. Investigators are now investigating the death of Peter Fabiano and trying to figure out the motive for the crime. What was the motive for the crime? Was it a Halloween prank gone wrong? Was it an attempt at robbery because he owned 2 successful businesses? Or was it something else? Was it a gang hit, perhaps? Did Peter have any enemies? The police initially thought the murder seemed to have characteristics of a gang hit because Peter had no criminal record. He only had 1 prior charge in 1948 for bookmaking. And I looked up bookmaking, and it's basically gambling and placing bets. So he had 1 charge in 1948 for that, and that was it. Nothing else was on his record. He had no other connections to any crime, so the gang hit thing, it was quickly ruled out. Police did eventually find 1 witness to the crime. It was a 15-year-old teenager who reported seeing a car fleeing from the scene during, the time of the murder. No shell casings were left at the scene, and nothing was reported stolen from the home. The suspects weren't even believed to have entered the home in the first place, though. So now they're just like, who would want Peter dead? So they're investigating, and with so much uncertainty, police began to look deeply into the lives of Peter and Betty. Police asked Betty about that night, and Betty told police that she thought there were 2 men at the door, with one pretending to be a woman. Because, she said the voice was deep, but it sounded kind of like a woman, So she thought there was 2 men, one pretending to be a woman. So police asked Betty if Peter had any enemies or if she knew anyone who would want to hurt Peter. And she did name 1 person that she thought would want to hurt Peter. And the person she named, Joan Rebel. After finding out about Joan, they were soon told the story of how the 2 women met and how a forbidden love triangle could have been the motive for Peter's death. So, wow, now we have a murder and a suspect. I miss diamond painting. I haven't been diamond painting a lot. Of course, I'm still on this same spot. But when I'm diamond painting, I'm like, this is so satisfying. And I really miss it. This second job is cutting into my crafting time, right? I think I'm going to switch out colors here. And then we are going to move right along. So Joan Rebel, she was born in Philadelphia in 1917, while others say she migrated for Lithuania. She was a freelance writer and photographer and would sail around the world and draw inspirations off of her many adventures. In 1957, she divorced from her husband and moved to California, and she found herself in Peter Fabiano's salon looking for work. So we're going to do the 7s here. So she divorced her husband, moved to California, and now she is looking for work. She lands herself into Peter Fabiano's salon, and Peter decided to hire her as a front desk receptionist. And this is how Joan and Betty met, and they became really good friends really quickly. Ooh, this is going to be so pretty. Ooh. So now Joan and Betty are really good friends. When Peter and Betty were having marital issues, Betty confided in Joan and explained to her that Peter had an abusive dark side. Joan was very upset about this and convinced Betty to move in with her for a while. Peter did not like how close the two women were and was threatened by their friendship. The relationship seemed what people would call abnormal, and they seemed to share more than the closeness two friends would share. So, you know how they call relationships abnormal when, you know, we'll get there. We'll get there. Joan loved Betty and was happy that she left her husband, but Betty eventually decided that she did want to stay married to Peter, and when they reconciled, she admitted to him that her and Joan were more than friends. They were lovers, and they had been having an affair. Peter had already suspected the affair, and Betty agreed that she would no longer see Joan. Joan was also fired from the salon. Joan was really upset when Betty decided to go back to her husband because she really thought that Betty would leave Peter for her. She thought with Peter out of the way, her and Betty would be free to live together and continue to share the happiness they found when Betty first left Peter. So, wow. When I was reading this, I'm like, oh, I didn't see that coming. When they said it was like a love triangle, I thought it was going to be Peter cheating on his wife, but it was quite the opposite, right? And it's the 1950s. So after things ended with Betty, 40-year-old Joan met Goldie Pfizer, who was an attractive 43-year-old medical secretary at the California Children's Hospital. Some reports say that Joan met Goldie way before her affair with Betty and they had lost touch, but others say that she met her after. So I think I'm going to go with after because some sources said that, you know, like I just said, Joan and Goldie met long ago, lost touch. You know, she continued to travel, do this, that, and then they, you know, found each other again. But a lot of other sources said the opposite. So it's like when you're researching these cases, you can find 5 different stories, 5 different sources that tells 5 different stories. So I'm like, what the heck? So we're going to go with that she met her after because that just, it makes sense to me. I don't know. So we're going to say she met her after. Oh, I'm like, where did that drill go? It's on my nail. I'm almost done with this color too. So while I get my next color, I'll continue telling the story. I left some right here, so I'm going to go back and do those. Alrighty. The two became inseparable. I'm talking about Joan and Goldie now. The two became inseparable and spent a lot of time together. Goldie reported to also be a lesbian, but up until that point, she hid her feelings and was married to a man named Herbert Crome. She too had recently divorced and was free to be her true self, but it was the 1950s, and being with a person of the same sex was less accepted. So that's why they were calling these relationships abnormal and things like that, because it is the 1950s and we have come a long way from that, right? All right. So Joan and Goldie met 3 months before Halloween in 1957 and often had coffee together in the mornings. It was during these coffee dates that Joan would tell Goldie about her horrible and evil boss, Peter, who would abuse his wife. Joan was very upset that Betty had ended their relationship and gone back to her husband, so she wanted revenge on Peter. She left that part out when she was telling Goldie how awful he was. So Joan did what she did best and began to seduce Goldie, and their relationship became similar to the relationship Joan previously had with Betty. Goldie was very trusting, so she believed Joan when she said that Peter was evil and was abusive to his wife. Joan told her many stories of his behavior and eventually convinced Goldie that she should help her kill Peter Fabiano. Because of Joan's constant disdain and complaining about Peter, Goldie built a hatred for a man that she had never met before. And because Goldie was infatuated with Joan and thought she truly loved her, she agreed to help murder Peter. Isn't that something? She doesn't even know this man. And Joan was so convincing that she agreed to help her kill him. Was she love bombing her? I wonder what she was saying to her. So Joan and Goldie carefully planned the death of Peter and was sure that there was no way that they would get caught. Goldie had agreed that she would be the one to kill Peter, so Joan took Goldie to Peter's salon on several occasions and pointed Peter out so Goldie was sure she could recognize him. Joan gave Goldie money to buy a gun, so Goldie went into the gun shop in Pasadena, California, and told them that she needed to purchase a gun for protection. She purchased a .38 Smith & Wesson that she would use for the crime. On that Halloween night in 1957, Joan borrowed a car from her friend, and the two women, Joan and Goldie, parked the car down the street from the Fabiano house and waited until they saw all of the lights in the house go out. Once all the lights were out, Goldie, wearing her blue jeans, a khaki jacket, red gloves, and a superhero mask as a disguise, approached the house, rang the doorbell, and when Peter opened the door, Goldie was holding a brown paper bag, one that would look like it was holding candy. And when Peter asked her if she thought it was too late to be trick-or-treating, she said no, quickly lifted her shaky hands and let off a shot right into Peter's chest. Peter fell to the ground and Goldie quickly ran back to the car, killing a man that before this incident she had never met. With Joan in the driver's seat, the two women sped off into the night. This is when the teenager saw the car fleeing the scene of the crime. Goldie said she truly thought that Peter was pure evil and would destroy everyone and everything around him. If I was to think about a hairdresser that's a man and their name, Peter Fabiano would probably be their name. I was just thinking about that. I was like, what a fitting name for his career, right? So after all of this, the two women burned the disguise that Goldie had been wearing. Joan dropped Goldie off at her home and told her to forget she ever met her. So when I read that, I'm like, what? Forget she ever met her? To me, it seems like Joan met and seduced Goldie just for this purpose and maybe didn't even really care for her that much because, you know, Goldie thought that Joan was in love with her and she was in love with Joan and they were going to be together and she was going to help kill Peter and get this man away from his wife, and he was so abusive and horrible and this and that, and they would be together and ride off into the sunset together. But after the deed was done, Joan said, "Baby girl, forget you ever met me." So that's crazy. We are going to get some teas. Let me do the plus sign because it's here. All these greens. I'm loving the greens. All right, so the morning after the crime, Goldie disposed of the weapon, the gun, in a storage locker of the Bullock department store in Los Angeles. So she disposed of the weapon after the morning after the crime. See, I still miss one. You know how you do all of them and you think you got them all, and then there's one left over. So here we go. There we go. So after the crime and police found out about Joan, her affair with Betty, and her disdain for Peter. Oh, what am I working with? They brought her in for questioning. She did not mention her affair with Betty. She simply stated that she was innocent and had nothing to do with the murder of Peter Fabiano. She told them she was good friends with the Fabianos and was heartbroken by the news and has an alibi for the murder. She tells police that she was home all day and night on Halloween and that her neighbors could tell them that her car would never move from its parking spot that night. So police questioned the neighbors and found out that it was true. Joan's car never moved that evening. So at this point, they have no evidence against Joan, so they do have to let her go. But they keep questioning people, and they decided to question one more person. That person was one of Joan's closest friends. Her name was Margaret Barrett. Police asked Margaret about Joan, and they get the same answer, that Joan's car never moved that day. But Margaret keeps talking, and she reveals much more that police had expected her to. She tells them that it's true that Joan's car never moved, but that does not mean that she was home all night. That night, Joan had asked to borrow Margaret's car to go to the grocery store. Margaret did question why Joan would need her car when she had a car of her own, but since she was a good friend, Margaret let her borrow her car anyway. Now, Joan could no longer use her car as an alibi since Margaret spilled the beans. Margaret went on to say that Joan put 37 miles on her car, and she did not understand why she needed to use that many miles to go to the neighborhood store. When detectives heard this, they looked at the distance between the Fabiano house and Joan's house and found that 37 miles was enough for Joan to travel to and from the Fabiano house with a short stop in between. So does that mean she went to the Fabiano's house, made a stop, and then went home to return the car? So after they find this out and they're questioning Joan, Joan then admits to borrowing Margaret's car to go to the grocery store. When police asked why it took her 37 miles to go to the grocery store, she simply told them that she decided to go to her favorite store, which was further away than the neighborhood store that she frequently shopped at. So at this point, the police keeps questioning her, asking questions, and asking her, why did you want to go to that store? Why couldn't you use your own car to go to that store? Why did you have to borrow Margaret's car? And for this, Joan could not come up with an answer, but she still did not fold. She stuck to her story. And since there was no physical or forensic evidence, they were forced to let her go. So Joan, she was stone cold. She stuck to her story. She said, I don't know why I borrowed Margaret's car. I just wanted to borrow her car. And I had all those miles because I went to my favorite store, which is further than the neighborhood store. So there you have it. So they had to let her go because they didn't have any more evidence other than the fact that she borrowed her friend's car and drove 37 miles. All right, let's do some teas. Let's change it up and do a different color because I've been on the greens. Let's get 919, which is the reddish brown. It is the Wise, not that many Wise. Alrighty. So now they have let Joan go because they don't have any more evidence against her. So they keep investigating, and about a month later, there was an anonymous tip that led detectives to the storage locker in downtown Los Angeles. Even though the tip seemed random, the police had no other evidence, so they decided to follow up on the tip. When they opened the storage locker, they found a .38 revolver, so they immediately ran ballistics on the gun and see that the gun in fact does match the murder weapon. They scanned sales records for the gun and found that it was sold to a Goldie Pfizer. So they went to Goldie's Hollywood home and picked her up for questioning in Peter's murder. When she was arrested, she told police that she was relieved and that it was good to get the incident off her mind. So police are like, wait, what? That was easy. So Goldie quickly confesses to killing Peter, naming Joan as the person who convinced her to kill him. The police arrest Joan shortly after, and both women are put on trial for murder. Joan and Goldie went through several psychiatric examinations. One of the psychiatrists wrote that the only thought Joan had was saving her friend from an evil person because she didn't even know Peter. And she had like no other motive to hurting him, right? The courts believed that the women were not fit to stand trial because they were homosexual. I said, wow, have times changed. Imagine not being competent to stand trial because you like the same sex. I'm like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. But that would not stand as your defense nowadays. So they're both being charged, and both women initially pled not guilty to the crimes. Goldie went with an insanity plea and claimed that she was easily influenced by Joan. She had no other motive or reason to hurt Peter, and she seemed really remorseful in court. Joan, on the other hand, she kept her silence. She refused to comment and remained stone-faced during the trial. And when she wasn't stone-faced, you could see her face was adorned with a strange smile. So she had this strange little smirky smile on her face. Both women were convicted in 1958, charged with second-degree murder, and sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. I'm not really sure how this was second-degree murder when they literally planned the murder of a man and carried it out. Like, how was that second degree? In 5 years to life? What the heck? Maybe it's because they said they weren't fit to stand trial. Maybe that's why they got lighter sentences. I don't know, but this is first-degree murder all the way. And even like a second-degree murder is more than 5 years of life. Jeez. Anyway, many people thought the 5-year sentence was rather light for two women who plotted and killed a man in cold blood. And I would have to agree. So Goldie served 5 years in prison and then was released. She stayed in Los Angeles. She eventually dies in 1998 at the age of 83. There was not a lot of information found about Joan, like her release date and all that wasn't like readily available. She was very secretive, so they believe that Joan was released around the same time as Goldie, like after 5 years. But little can be found on her life in her release. She just sort of disappeared. So she stayed out of Dodge after she went to prison and all of that. So then Betty Fabiano sold the beauty business after Peter's death, and she remarried in 1966. Like Joan, she pretty much kept her silence on the events of that night. She died in 1999 at the age of 81 in Palm Desert, California. Do you think that Betty had a hand in her husband Peter's death? I don't know, because she kept her silence like really about the situation and everything. Maybe, you know, when she remarried, she did remarry a man, so maybe she was like ashamed of being with a woman or something like that. I don't know. This is all just speculation on my part, but she really didn't talk about like the death of Peter, and she sold the business and everything. So I don't know, but some people do speculate that she had a hand in his death. because she sold those businesses and got that money and stayed low key, right? And then what about the anonymous tip to the police about the gun being in the storage locker? I'm like, okay, I have a theory here. Betty, I'm not saying this is true. This is just speculation and a theory. Betty and Joan, they conspired to kill Peter to get him out of the way. So Betty met Goldie, convinced her to do this, and then told her to forget about her, and then called in that anonymous tip to tell them where the gun was so that Goldie can go down for the murder, and the two women, Betty and Joan, can live happily ever after off of Peter's money. That's probably not what happened, but you know, you speculate a little bit, like what truly happened. It's probably just a case of Joan being a mad woman and killing Peter because she wanted to be with Betty, and she was upset that Betty went back to him after their love affair. So it's probably just that simple of a case. Right. There is still so much mystery surrounding the case, you know, because Joan would not talk and Betty didn't really talk either. So there's like a lot of mystery. The only person that talked was Goldie, and Goldie can only say her part. She doesn't know what happened before she came around, and the two women, you know, all she knows is what Joan told her. So that's pretty much all we know on the case. Like I said, it was a short case. So I told you like one of the theories, but there is a couple more theories. Did Goldie call the tip in on the storage locker because she like felt guilty about the death? You know, when they showed up, she just, oh, I'm so glad you're here, and spilled the beans. She said she was relieved when they showed up. So did she call the police on herself because she thought if she used the insanity plea and blamed it on Joan that she would get off? That's a theory. And then the other one's about Betty and Joan, who plotted to have Goldie take the fall for the murder so they can live happily ever after. And then what if Betty, you know, planned this for insurance money? Also, what I did find very interesting was that what if Betty plotted this whole thing, right? And she manipulated Joan to have her husband killed by telling her all of these evil things that he was doing so she can end her marriage, dissolve her salon business, and be free of Peter and live happily ever after with someone else. So that's another thing, right? So we will never know. This case is pretty old and all the people involved have passed away. So that is the case for today. I didn't get that much done. This was a short case, but I got more done than I have in the past week or so. Hopefully, I want to finish this canvas in November. Next week is my birthday and I took 5 days off. So I should be able to finish this canvas. That is my goal for the month. And then work on some other things. I wanted to finish so many projects this year, but I haven't even finished half of the things. So many things going on. And then with me getting the new puppy and him needing to be potty trained and cage trained and command trained and walking and all the things, when I come home from work, I don't really get to diamond paint because I am with the dogs. And yeah, it's a time. So yes, guys, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you love diamond painting, crafting, and all things hobbies, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share my videos with a friend. Until then, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.